Welcome to the Heallist podcast, where we inspire and guide healers through business expansion. We give voice to incredibly abundant healers to share their stories. We dive into the quantum field to unlock the energies of conscious creation. We also develop digital tools to help you grow, which you can find on heallist.com. I'm your host, Yuli, and I'm grateful you chose to join this space. Now let's go deep. Hello, my dear friends. Another exciting, insightful episode is here for you. And today we have with us Sat Prem. She studied as a musician and is now a healer, teacher, Kundalini yogi, Chinese acupuncturist, and naturopath. She studied healing in New York with Gurudev Singh Khalsa. That's where she got her spiritual name, Sat Prem, which means true love or a divine love of truth. She was born in Tel Aviv, lived in New York, and moved to Berlin 12 years ago, where she has her own practice, working with groups and individuals. She also trains teachers and works in person and remotely. She has mastered the art of remote healing. And today, our conversation will focus on this fascinating topic. And my intention for this episode is to bring more clarity and go behind the scenes of remote healing to help people, healers and their clients, to gain more comfort with this concept. Yuli, so great to have you. And if you have your intention for this episode, please feel free to share that as well.
Thank you so much for having me. And my intention for today is to inspire healers who are listening to us to step into this magical world of remote healing, to really explore it and be able to add it to their work. And also, then I hope to inspire everyone who's listening, not necessarily professional therapists, to recognize how they too can and should become healers within the context of their own life, because our world just really needs all of us to be healers right now.
I love this message so much. I couldn't agree more. I think it's all about empowering. And then I think it's a perfect place to start our conversation with, since we started talking about clients and really everyone, how do you prepare clients for this experience of remote healing? Are there any misconceptions you have to address first? Any blocks with that idea itself?
Yeah, I feel like something has really opened up also for... I'm often quite surprised at how open people are at this point to the idea. It happens sometimes that I have like somebody who comes to me to my practice and gets treatment for whatever, and then they hear that I also offer this service and they think of their mom who lives somewhere else or somebody else who's suffering from something, and can you do that? Can you? And somehow I find that this has become a really kind of much more acceptable than it was years ago when I started, and then I would have expected it to be. I always prepare myself for like explanations, and people kind of say, "Okay, let's do it." Yeah,
that's wonderful to hear. That no explanation needed anymore these days. So, how do we then set the stage for that? Is there any technique that you prepare specifically for remote healing versus in person? Anything different that you kind of have to think about before?
Actually, I do what I will always do, but it's even more essential when we talk of remote healing, which is go within and connect even before I meet that person. But again, this actually happens every time somebody approaches me. Let's say I get an email from somebody and I actually go already in the space and relate to them to within myself, understand the problem and what figure it out, actually. I feel like with remote healing, it's even more important with remote healing to understand the specific situation that the client is in at a given moment. Because we're used to like a normal encounter in the practice between a client and a healer, which is a therapy encounter, but still there's something about it which is very normal. It's two people in the same room where we understand the situation. And I can see where they're at. I can see what they're going through. But with remote healing, it's really important to understand, what happens when I close my video chat or the phone, and what's going to go what's going to develop for that person? What are they going to experience, and how I can be able to contain that, to understand how, how the healing will develop.
Yeah, and that's a great flow into the next idea is how do you hold the space virtually?
In the very same way that I hold the space for in person, and even in a more pronounced way or in a more clear way. And the point is just to hold the space. It's the way that we connect to people. And I find that my work as a remote healer, and also have been teaching it in the past years, really makes it very clear that it's all about holding the space. It's not about this one-on-one encounter or a physical space that we occupy. It's really a space which is beyond the physical realm, which is beyond the physical conditions. It's a space of meditation that I work in. It's the realization that everything is actually contained within my own space, whether it's an online space that I work in, or an in-person one. It's anyway, in a sense, happening within my own meditative state.
So can we get a little more granular? I'm really drilling on that, because I think a lot of people hear the idea of, energy exchange or holding space. Can we really get into the details? What does it mean? Are we talking about quantum energies here? We're talking about electromagnetic field. We're talking about person's aura, their personal field. Can you just describe it a little bit more, I would say, visually and or scientifically for people?
I've listened to your podcast, and I think you use the quantum field quite often. I suppose I could say the same. Yeah. I suppose I could use it too. I'm not a physicist, but I once told about my work to an actual physics professor. He gave me the look, so I don't use that any longer. I somehow simplify and I say the field. Yeah, you can find it in mystical poetry, and you can find it in meditation practices. It's the field of perception. Sometimes I call it that, simply the field of consciousness. You can also say, you often use the term field of energy, and working with energies, I can also say that everything is energy. So consciousness and energy in that sense are one. I like to use the term consciousness, a field of consciousness. This is, to me, in a sense, being the most abstract, also the clearest, because it really transcends this idea of transmission of energy. When I think of energies, I still think of something like throwing a ball at something and getting this ball back. And it's much more multidimensional than that. So I think I would use the term field of consciousness or field of perception, which is perhaps the way that we work with this consciousness through our own perception. Yeah.
And how does that energy exchange happening, and especially in the virtual world?
If you use energy, the term energy exchange, that again brings us back to this throwing of a ball. And I don't know that that it's really energy healing that I do. Sometimes very specifically, I will choose to work in moving energy here or there, but this is not really the core of it. It can be a specific choice within the space. And the healing that I practice is based in the reality of it's a non-dual state. Yeah. So the experience of the healer is that actually everything happens within my own consciousness. I'm at the same time absolutely centered, but so expanded that everything is contained. And then anything that I introduce in my own awareness affects anything that's there that I choose to. I don't want to use the word focus, because focus is too narrow and the state is very expanded. But anything I direct my attention to will be affected to any shifts that I introduce in my own consciousness, because I learn to contain it all in a way, to allow it to happen, to somehow remove myself from the equation in such a way that what is left is consciousness, perception, and only one point of view. In a way.
So if you remove yourself from that consciousness, does it mean that you're actually entering the other person's consciousness or their field of energy, and then you're healing there, or you bring them to yours, or you're in some neutral field that you both are accessing?
Your question is very dual in that it assumes that there's me and the other. Yeah.
Oh,
if I were to,
sorry.
Yeah. If I were to try and explain it, first of all, it's a healing based in silence. So, all I can do when I teach it and when I try to explain it is try to not disturb the silence and maybe, give a little roadmap of what's actually happening. But if I were to try and explain it from a dual perspective, then probably this would be healing with the power of resonance, right? But I tend to like to think of it as this non-dual state where there's no real separation. All I have, my only power, is my perspective, my intention, which is to heal. And then it can be a more specific intention to heal this, to look at that, and so on. And then my observation, where I direct this point of view. I can direct it here, I can direct it there. That's it. But it's one field. It's tricky to speak with, because we speak with an I. An I is a dual, so it's not really possible to use language to describe it. But then there is the healer's point of view, the healer's intention, and then the healing happens within the field through this intention and attention, actually.
Well, thanks for reminding about the duality and oneness. So I guess step one is to step out of the duality and step into oneness. Is that true?
That sounds easy when you say it. But recognize that this possibility that we actually are there all the time. It's about recognizing. And all of us who meditate, who have experienced any kind of meditation, then we actually are familiar with the taste, with the feeling of these fields. And then it's about recognizing, stabilizing this state. And then there's a leap when I teach it. It's a huge leap of actually recognizing that our silence can be applied, that this is something that we have a power there, that we can do something with it. This is like the leap of the unbelievable, right? But this is, what it is.
I saw that you're teaching a workshop for teachers on applied silence, and I find it fascinating. So can you talk a little bit more about it?
Yeah, this happened like a couple of weeks ago, and it was actually the first time that I taught a specific workshop for teachers. Because as you said before, I'm a healer and I teach healing. This is perhaps my main focus, but I've been a teacher trainer of Kundalini yoga for many years. And I find that in my work as a teacher of yoga and as a teacher trainer, this is one of my most important skills, just in holding space for a big group. In a sense, when I teach, it's like a healing session. I go in my meditative state and I've trained myself to be able to talk, to be in a kind of state of trance and very deep meditative state. And at the same time to talk very normally and to lead a group. And in that sense, when I teach a class, it's the same as a healing session, actually. And I find that this applied silence is really my most important teaching skill. And I thought it would be a good idea to try and come up with a workshop or with ways to really give or offer that skills to teachers. Because usually what I teach is healers to heal. So this was a very fascinating experience. We had them really go in a meditative state and then work on each other, just learning this art of relating to something from within your meditative state. So not just go, because sometimes we go in meditation and we think of, okay, I go in a trance, I go and lose myself. And the idea here is to stay very, very present and somehow include somebody else in your meditative state. So we worked on that. And then I had them practice teaching, really staying in this meditative state and instructing the group, which was really fascinating. You could hear in their voice and in how they were that this was something very new and very interesting.
Wow. It's an incredible skill. I want to do everything in a meditative state.
Right?
That's the goal, right? To live our life.
That's the goal. Yeah. My teacher once told us a story before he mastered the healing arts and the yogic arts. He was Mexican, Gurudev. And in his earlier years, he studied with a shaman in the jungles, and he was there for several years. And then he said that this guy they were just walking around in the jungle, and once a day for a few minutes, he would say, okay, let's stop. And now we think. The rest of the time was a flow. There were 5 minutes a day devoted to some mental activity. So yeah, we want to do everything in a state of meditation. That would be amazing.
It's incredible. You touched a little bit on the subjects of teaching groups. How do you find that experience to be different or similar when you're talking about remote groups? I'm just imagining this scenario, like, you have this large group of people, let's say it's 20 people on a Zoom call. Some of them are on video, some of them are just on audio, some of them are maybe like, I don't know, trying to eat their lunch while they're in this group session or whatever. They might be distracted. Okay. How do you bring this group together? And I think in a way it's easier to do in a in-person space, right? In a physical space, because you can control the distraction level. Right. And it's in a way by bringing them into the space, you're bringing them into the field. I find it really, fascinating and sounds like challenging to do remotely. Can you talk about your experience?
Yeah. I've been doing it for only 1 year online. I was always teaching in person. And through actually COVID and then my pregnancy and like a lot of things that happened in life, I realized that I wanted to start teaching it online. This was something that in the tradition that I belonged to was absolutely forbidden. We were told that this was like dangerous and so on. And so when I hear something like this, I feel like that's something I have to experiment with. And so I did. And it's been really transformative and an amazing experience. But I have to say that I never had this problem. First of all, I don't allow them to just not show their face. It's always so far has been groups of between 10, 20 people or even more of people who show their faces and were very interested in learning. So I found no difficulty somehow to manage the group. And once we go in this space, I found that I gave workshops of 3 hours and sometimes of 6 hours or a whole weekend. And people were really just going in this state of trance or deep silence and without any difficulty. In some way, this year of teaching it like this showed me even more strongly the power of this space. We had like cases where people from different continents were just experiencing having the same experience in the same moment, like energy stuff, moving their body here and there in the same moment with eyes closed in different spaces. So there was never the problem of lack of interest so far. Yeah.
That's incredible. No, that's so good to hear. And can you talk about any cases of really fascinating reactions that happened during those remote healing or remote teaching sessions? Anything that happened like at the same time in different places, or any stories that you could share?
Yeah. Well, first, these energy experiences of people just sharing. It started actually, I had a couple people in different places, but then one couple doing it in the same room. And then they shared with a group that they, at the same moment, had the same experience that the body was tilting backwards in a very specific way or so. And then when they said it, they said that other people in the group started saying the same thing. So this happened. But actually happens all the time, all kinds of things. We had this experience. I usually don't even talk too much about these things because anything can happen. Like another thing that I learned from my teachers, like in a healing session or a teaching, anything can happen. Like the wildest thing. And then you write them in your notebook and you turn the page. And this is the way to grow, somehow to forget about the fireworks of consciousness, all that stuff that can happen. But it is fun sometimes. We had, I guess, just a moment after I was teaching them that we were working, I guess, remotely on somebody's mother, or was it her relationship with I don't remember. But then all of us very clearly had the experience of the mother very present in all of our living rooms. And this is just a moment after I told them, don't do that kind of stuff. We don't summon anybody. We don't do that nonsense. And then there it was. So this also happened. But
wow.
Yeah.
So what do you do with a mother when that happens?
She was a nice
summon her back.
And we sometimes also do remote, which has also been interesting. It's like a group of people in different places doing remote healing on somebody who's not there. Maybe somebody we don't know. That's perfectly possible. Yeah. I also do that as a healer. Somebody gives me or asks me to heal somebody who's a relative, for example, and without me talking to that person. That's actually very possible. Yeah.
So at that moment, what do you need to know about the person to be able to perform remote healing for them?
Actually, nothing. I need to be able to connect. And connecting in the field is a bit like finding a plug in a way. Yeah. When everything exists, when you recognize that everything happens in you, everything means a whole universe. And the question is only if you can, direct your attention or connect to something specific. And generally, when somebody introduces somebody, then the information somehow is in the field because they know that person. And I've discovered that we're always right in a sense that after a healing session, we know or we can tell that how this has developed or how they're feeling right now, or this, you can very clearly relate to that information.
That's an incredible power. So you're saying that you don't need to know their name, their picture, where they live, and just the information that the person is giving you that moment is enough for you to create connection with their consciousness.
Yes. I will sometimes ask a few questions, maybe because it helps us connect better. And also it's a human, interaction. The same as in my practice. Maybe somebody enters the door or only writes to me an email and I already know what needs to be done, but we're having a human interaction. So it's, that's also part of it. And that's nice and good. But generally, we can learn to relate to anybody just by forming this connection of finding it.
So you basically don't need long questionnaires about all of their past history and medical history, personal history, where they've been, what's wrong with them, what's right with them, none of that.
No, I don't. But I need them to feel safe. So, according to the situation, I might ask all kinds of questions. I need them to feel contained and safe and all of that. So.
And if you do remote healing for someone and someone comes to you and says, my mother needs remote healing or whoever it is, do you need permission of that person to perform that or to connect with their consciousness?
Generally, yes, very much so. Yeah. I devoted also an episode or part of it about the consent and generally the code of ethics of healing, and especially remote healing. In my video course, it's very important. Even when my child was a baby, I used to ask her, at least tell her, and just, it's the decent thing to do. And then there are exceptions, of course. If somebody's in a coma, for example, then I think it's appropriate to, I can't even say that as a generalization, but there may be cases where healing without consent is appropriate. And there may be cases where it's even necessary. If you're a healer and you find yourself in a situation that obviously requires healing. Healing can also be not just a healing session to one specific person, but healing a situation of violence or whatever. Then of course you just do it. Yeah. I was on a flight and we thought we were just, the flight was going all crazy and everybody was in panic. So I just did some healing on everybody, and that's, I feel, is very appropriate. But generally, you need to ask for somebody's consent. And I've also had cases where we didn't get the person's consent. Like a client of mine who wanted me very much to work on her dad. And he said, no, I don't believe that stuff. And then we didn't do it. Yeah. And that's just the karma or that's how it is.
In cases like that, do you try to talk to the person and explain what you do, maybe in terms that they can be more comfortable with, or you just kind of, whoever's not ready, they're not ready?
Generally, whoever's not ready is not ready, but it really depends on the situation. And when this was a situation of somebody's father and so on, or people suggesting this to other people, but when people are in my practice already, even in like my in-person practice, usually I find that they're already open once they know me, or the situation usually comes at some moment that they can't come to the practice and they're at home, and then I offer, let's do a remote healing, and then they say, okay, yeah.
That is an incredible skill. So it's a skill that, it seems like you're teaching it and you've mastered it so well. What are some of we had to kind of structure this course that you have, what are some of the parts that you teach specifically, just to give people idea? Because I have a feeling that we have maybe an audience of healers that are listening to it that are really used to working in person, or they might think the modality they're practicing is not fitted for remote healing. What are some of the skills that you find are specific to remote healing that people need to master, and some of the blocks maybe that they need to overcome?
Blocks are very simple. Just this, the standard, I can't do it or it can't be done. Come, I invite you to one of my classes and you will, I've had some skeptics and they were convinced by the end of it that they can do it and that they can experience it also as Healese. Actually, my whole course since it's a video course, is very, very fitting for remote healers. It can also be practiced or applied by people who work in person, but people are very strongly encouraged to try it remotely. But then there's one specific episode, for example, on what we call in yoga the subtle body, which is a very useful, let's call it, tool with remote healing. And I love to practice it when I teach the online classes also. The subtle bodies that in our perception or in our minds that allows us to, I can call it time travel and definitely space travel. With remote healing, this, let's call it space travel, is, and as you notice, I'm very cautious with these things because they sound like science fiction and I don't like it. And
not to me.
Okay. To me, somehow, maybe that's my conditioning. Like when I was little, the word healer was like, what is that? Right? So it's still sometimes awkward for me to speak in this way. But this subtle body is that in us which can, for example, I can go to the space where you are now and I can feel the smell in the room or have the sense of how the light in your space is falling on my skin. Right? Just this very clear sensory experience of being somewhere else. I've had a class when I took people to the moon, where we had the clear sense of the earth, of the coolness and of the sense of the earth on the moon. Yeah, you can go anywhere and have this clear sensation and information. So it's not that it's essential for remote healing. You can work with more like clairvoyance and so on, but the subtle body is a nice tool. Yeah. I often use it when I want to create that kind of sense of containment for somebody, almost like the sense of my physical presence next to them. And this is very possible with this tool. And then there's this episode that I call Inner Knowing, which is, I think for healers is kind of important, but definitely for remote healers, because there's more that you really need to trust that what you can call intuition or seeing things or knowing them. Yeah.
Now that's incredible and makes total sense to me, by the way. No blogs here, but those senses that you mentioned, do you find that some people just have them and some people don't, or is it something that people can develop over time?
Both are true. Yeah. Some people have them and others can develop them, and everybody can develop them. Yeah. There's really also in Kundalini Yoga, which is this tradition that I come from, there's really very specific things for all of these things. You can really develop it, clairvoyance and other things as well. But yet some people are born more sensitive than others in different ways.
Well, you touched on Kundalini Yoga, and I was waiting for this subject because actually I didn't mention our intro, but we have so many things in common. I mean, First of all, living in Tel Aviv for a while, it's one commonality that we found, but another one is a big one. We actually both studied in the very same school in New York City. And I didn't go through, the training like you did. I was just a student, but for many, many years, I was studying in Kundalini Yoga East in the city, one of the really biggest schools in the US of Kundalini Yoga. And I stumbled upon Kundalini Yoga very early in my life and my practices before I was on this spiritual entrepreneurship path even. And I didn't realize like how much of some of those concepts were really what seems to me today like basis of a lot of the different modalities. And I'm curious how you look at Kundalini yoga, because I feel like it doesn't always get credit because I see a lot of practices now that people use, for example, like the Kundalini breath or, awakening the Kundalini energy without calling it this way. And I'm not sure why. I think maybe the name Kundalini maybe kind of can distract some people or bring some certain associations. But really, it's an incredible toolbox that I'm seeing being used by so many different modalities. Can you tell us how you incorporate the Kundalini tools in your current practice?
Oh, I love it, first of all. I was blessed to find this directly. I never tried any other kind of yoga. I didn't stumble upon a Kundalini. I actually came across the concept of Kundalini, and I was lucky to have Kundalini Yoga East literally around the corner. And the first class was I hated every second, and it was clear to me that I will practice this every day now for the rest of my life. And this has been almost 20 years ago. It's just an incredible practice. And I hated it because there's the intensity of it and the weirdness of it. But it's just, as these tools should be when touching on so many parts of our consciousness. So first of all, I use it very purely and I give it credit. I use it in my course and I call it Kundalini Yoga. And I'm still a teacher trainer in Kundalini Yoga, traditional Kundalini or KRI, so-called KRI Kundalini Yoga training. So I definitely walk this path. And to me, it's just the most efficient way to shift, to go in group consciousness for sure, but also to shift the consciousness in very specific ways. And first of all, there's the Kundalini energy itself, and which is certainly that which we work with, is this kind of marriage of energy and consciousness. It brings you very fast or very efficiently to this state of witness consciousness or this very deep meditative state, which is the starting point for my healing work. So, yeah. And it has the most profound impact on the nervous system. I don't know any practice that works so profoundly on the nervous system. I actually am famous or kind of infamous for using in my healing classes, because sometimes we only have 3 hours and I want to go deep fast. So I love those arm exercises of Kundalini yoga. I get them, to have their arms up in the air for 15 minutes, and you go through this misery, and then the meditative state and the state of silence is just incredible. So I simply don't know any other process or a technique that is so efficient and so profound. And then there's very specific things, and this I learned so much from my teacher, that he would use to really release specific blockages in the group. So if you feel like I'm teaching and then something in the communication is not flowing, I'm not getting through somehow, or they're kind of scattered, or there's something there, then we do 11 minutes of this very specific meditation, and then this very specific meridian right here at the third eye point opens, and that's it. It's just the most efficient way to release very specific blockages. Yeah.
Totally. And I love how Yogi Bhajan called it technology, actually. It wasn't a method. It wasn't a practice. He called it Kundalini technology. And I always connected that. The tech in me always connected when I found the school. I was like, okay, this speaks to me. And it really felt like a technology. Like you said, you're doing one thing, you stick to the directions, and it's just pure magic.
Yes. I remember I found it all, the technology and all this kind of talk. And today it makes perfect sense to me. This is exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. He was way ahead of his time, I guess.
That is true.
A lot of those concepts. But it's great that, you're not only keeping the tradition, you are embedding it in some of the other methods that are more like general healing methods. And I think that's maybe, at least from what I'm seeing, studying different traditions and different schools. And I'm always a learner. I love discovering new tools, new technologies. But I feel like at the end of the day, it's all healing. And I think sometimes like separating those things and giving them names that might like take away from the possibilities or the potential. Because there are still people that, once you give it a name, I feel like it needs to resonate with a person, and sometimes it doesn't. Mm-hmm. If you don't point it specifically and tie it into a specific like culture or tradition or I don't know, ancient practice, it kind of opens it up to many more people to resonate with.
That's very true. Yeah.
And I learned that from my current favorite teacher, Joe Dispenza. That's what I love about him, because the way he teaches, it's very neutral, right? And it's very, and he says that intentionally. And because of that, he can resonate with many more people. Yeah. So I totally understand how you incorporate all those different amazing technologies and tools that you studied, and you want to be called a healer. It's just all healing.
Yeah. I also find myself on this very interesting journey that started with Gurudev. And I feel like that I try to continue it in a way. And the journey is that this healing was taught in absolute silence traditionally. It's this thing that was practiced by healers, by shamans, by yogis for millennia. And Gurudev was the first one who got the job of actually trying to teach it to the public and use words for it. And he was doing it incredibly for a few decades. And I really feel that my work is also to elucidate it in different ways. Yeah. To find the words for silence is, yeah, it's an interesting.
Yeah. How do you teach applied silence and not in again, silence?
That's the question. Applied silence without disturbing the silence. Yeah. Always somehow very carefully guiding the people through, and sometimes telling them, here's a roadblock, beware of that. That's not where you want to go. And just has to be this balance of allowing people their experience. Yeah, because this is what it's really about, the experience of those who practice, and I'm only there to guide them through.
Well, this was so beautifully said, and I just love this very deep and nuanced conversation. I hope it resonated with people, because I think you've said a lot of things that people might not be talking about as openly or descriptively. And I think you open hopefully a lot of doors and a lot of minds with this conversation. And if you have any last words of wisdom for our listeners, please share them.
Maybe I tell you a little story if we have a moment. I somehow had it in my mind when I thought of what you might be asking me about remote healing. And I remember my first remote healing session, which I did and I thought was so profound. I was like a really proud healer by the end of it. And the story was that she was a friend of mine. We were studying together in school, and she just asked for some healing. And I can share it because it was a bit of a traumatic experience for me, and one that I learned a lot from. She texted me and she asked for some healing. She had a bit of a cold and so on. And I went straight in my space and I did the most profound healing that I could do. And it sounds horrible now. Maybe let's start with the end. She's still my friend and she came back for more. Yeah. But by the end of this evening, or the next day, actually, when I saw her in school, I never saw a person so pale in my life. I finished the healing and I thought this was so good, right? I went as deep as I could. And then what happened is that this poor, nice person was with 4 little kids at home. Her husband was away. She had a cold and she was weak and she wanted a little boost of energy. Yeah. And I was this proud and arrogant healer. I went as deep as I could, and something was released that was so deep that she had this energy flowing all the way to her head, and she thought she was going to die, and she called an ambulance for this anxiety attack that she had. Yeah. That's a horrible, that's a horrible story. That's that healing session where I learned of important was to understand the situation, to be able to contain it and not just go for it. So I was working on writing this, something that I would call like the remote healer's code of ethics and what really to pay attention.
So how would you do it differently today?
I would make sure two things. I would make sure that I understood the situation beforehand. And the idea of you can choose to heal. I teach people always to go as deeply as possible as healers. Always try to go to the underlying conditions and really go very deep. But sometimes that's not the right thing to do. Sometimes what the person needs is a symptomatic healing. And sometimes, or actually always, what you want to look at in a healing is what is actually the next step that you can take the person, where you can take them towards. What's the next step? What's the effective thing to do right now? Just be very clear. This is what I learned, to be very clear in my mind of what I was trying to achieve and what I was doing and what the situation was. That's one thing. And the second thing that I learned of how important it was to offer this kind of containment, which can be done in different ways. Sometimes I would ask to talk to the person after the healing, but not necessarily. Very often this is something that I do within myself. Just be very clear on how I perceive the results of the healing and give this meditative containment to the person. In whatever way you do it, can be in the meditative space or in deciding to, get a feedback or talk to the client later. Just, not to leave them there with the experience, not knowing what's going to happen. Because when profound healing happens, there can come anxiety. Yeah? Sometimes the sense is like the person is losing some point of reference, something that we identify in a way with that which tortures us, with a discomfort. And then when it's suddenly gone, if a profound healing happened, then anxiety can come, which is okay. But in some way we have to contain it or prepare the person for that, or be able to perceive it when we work. So this was my
oh my God, that's such an amazing lesson. And I love that you shared that. And, I have, first of all, so many follow-up questions. I know we're almost at the end of our conversation, but the one thing I wanted to touch on, and I think you said it very beautifully, like a lot of people come just for symptoms, right? They just want some immediate relief for something like a cold or some other easy condition that they have, but deep inside that they need a deeper healing. How do you approach that? Do you test to see if the person is kind of ready to go there, or you discuss that with the person? Because I don't know if many people will tell you like, yes, I'm ready to face that deep healing. Bring it on. I'm ready for that anxiety that's going to come with it. It takes like a very specific person to do that.
And by the way, even if they do say that, they usually aren't. They actually, they will at the same time do everything within their power to defend themselves of this moment at the same time. But it's a complex question. The answer is also complex. My goal as a healer is still, even if not at a specific moment, it's to go as deep as possible. My goal is, the liberation of that person, as their spiritual advancement, even if they have a headache. So I don't forget about their headache. I want it to be relieved. And then I will, again, this idea of taking the right step for the moment. Yeah. I will not ask, if they came for a healing session, it's not that I ask for consent for things that are too abstract to explain. I do try to explain that I will go as deep as I can or so, but yeah, this idea of understanding what might happen and what is the person ready for. And then in a context of a longer process, then I definitely will try to convert that person in the sense of making them understand that it's not a headache, but the ancestral trauma or the blockage of the creativity or the whatever, or even if we don't call it a specific name, to make them understand that this process is a spiritual process and not a pain in the shoulder.
That is incredible. Well, thank you so much for those insights. I feel like it was so useful for our audience, and some of those things you shared from your practice and your experience is just so valuable. And also, I love your energy and this peacefulness and the ease of just talking to you. I feel like I could talk forever and explore more of those topics and go deeper and deeper. I do love the deep stuff. But it was such a pleasure to have you, and thank you so much.
To be here.
Thank you for opening the door to your practice and to your understanding of healing. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a really great pleasure, Phil. Thank you so much.